Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Best8a Podcast. For this episode, we are in the company of Lee Kair. He is currently a principal at the Chertoff Group. Lee worked in the federal government for a long time and has experience working in the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Coast Guard, DoD, DHS headquarters, and TSA. Take a listen to his incredible background and his very insightful advice for people in the contracting world. This will be a great opportunity to learn about procurement from a very experienced former contracting officer's perspective. Let's listen to what Lee has to say.
Lee, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your career.
Sure. So my name is Lee Kair. I'm a principal at the Chertoff Group. So a little bit about my background. I started my career in the military as an officer in the United States Air Force. Started off at Brooks Air Force Base, where I did contracting for base contracting as well as for the labs there. There's a medical lab there that does a lot of human factors type of contracting to help pilots be more effective. From there, I went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where I got my master's in government contract management at the Air Force Institute of Technology, and then transitioned over to the Engine System Program Office, where I was a contracting officer for jet engines. And in both Brooks and at Wright-Patterson, I kind of cut my teeth on electronics, where we came up with the first automated contracting system down at Brooks Air Force Base using faxes, automated faxes. This is before the internet, right? And then when I was at Wright-Pat, I set up the first integrated digital environment between GE, Pratt Whitney, the engine SPO, DCMA, DCAA, and the 3 logistics centers. So it was the first time that we really started to collaborate electronically. So I did this kind of as a side job, in addition to being a warranted contracting officer. I caught the eye of the head of contracts at Aeronautical Systems Center, a guy by the name of General Frank Anderson, and he went up to be the head of contracts for the Air Force. And so he brought me up to the Air Force to be the technical architect for the digital systems for electronic contracting for the Air Force. And so I was the technical architect putting together the different components of electronic contracting. And as part of doing that, I caught the eye of a lady by the name of Dee Lee. She was the administrator of the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. And she asked me to come up to the White House to help designate the single point of entry at the time, which later became FedBizOps.
Wow.
So I was the guy that was up there at the White House working with the Hill and with GSA and others setting up FedBizOps. And then I followed her over to DPAP, Defense Procurement Acquisition Policy, when she was the director there on OSD staff. And so as a reservist, after I left active duty, I started working with her over there. And then I was at that point, I was also a contractor working at a defense contractor as a civilian job and as a reservist working in DPAP. And I did my a 45-day tour on the evening of the Pentagon that ended the week before 9/11.
Wow.
And so I got really mad at the time, and so I quit my job and went over to DHS, which didn't even exist at the time. It was the Office of Homeland Security. And so I helped stand up the component, the Chief Procurement Officer function within DHS.
Wow.
So I had 2 jobs there. One was, once again, I took over that kind of role as the technical architect of the electronic systems for the 22 agencies in DHS and to try to merge those and get some efficiencies out of that. And then I also stood up the strategic sourcing program for DHS. So at the time, I was still a reservist at the Pentagon, but I was also the director of strategic sourcing for DHS. So I had my feet in kind of both camps. So we actually joined forces between DoD and DHS. This is relevant now for what I'm doing. The focus of strategic sourcing was not contracts. The contracting part is easy. What we did was we brought the program managers from each of the different agencies that had responsibilities for those business functions, and they worked together to develop a combined program, and then went out to contract for that requirement in a joint fashion.
Let me ask you something. Why do you say that the contracting is the easy part? Are you saying that the difficult part is to come up with a requirement? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. That's the key. And that's what strategic sourcing, in my opinion, really should be about, is how do you set up the program side so that you can effectively buy what it is that you need? Because the requirement is really the hard part, particularly if you're coming up with a joint program with multiple entities that are interested in it.
See, what is your, high-level assessment of how the government procure things right now? Let's talk about specifically about how they come up with the requirements. How they do it, how do you think they should do it, if you think there's a difference?
Yeah, so that is the tough part, where a lot of times they will take the old contract statement of work or spec or whatever, they'll dust it off, they'll try to update it a little bit, and then they'll put it back out for procurement again, right? Because everybody's busy, and that's kind of the easy way to do it, right? And then it's all focused on contracts at that point. Okay. Where if you get the requirement correct up front, and you bring industry in to bring the best practices, because technology is always evolving. If you bring industry in early to help shape those requirements, you get a better product and you can actually promote competition. And I think where contracting sometimes gets it wrong, contracting officers get it wrong, is it's treated as an us versus them, where there is concern that if you bring industry in, they are going to get some sort of an advantage that is improper, and so they are reluctant to actually engage with industry.
But contracting officer Lee, they have a problem, because if they receive one, they need to receive everything. How do you manage that? What are your thoughts?
So that's true after the cone of silence comes down, right? But when when the statement of work goes out. But if you have open industry days and your program offices are doing a good job of market research and they're talking to lots of different companies, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that's actually encouraged in the FAR to go out, find out as much as you can about your environment, doing market research, and have industry days, do RFIs, do BAA submissions, do all those things so that you really understand what the program is, what the state of the art is for that program, and then revise the statement of work and put out a draft statement of work early on and get comment on it.
Okay, I'll tell you. I think RFI sources out, I think they do it. Industry days, they do it. Is that enough?
No. Well, they do it, but my point is that it is there's not enough flexibility in the way those are done, where sometimes it is checking the mark on a procurement process as opposed to really listening to industry to try to incorporate best practices and shape the way that a requirement is actually developed.
Can we blame industry a little bit? Yeah. Could it be that sometimes industry don't do a good job responding to RFIs?
Absolutely. So here's the problem. Industry goes to the government and tries to sell them their good or service, as opposed to going to the government and explaining how they're going to solve their problem. There's a translation problem there. And the number of companies that go in, when I was in government, so the first half of my career was in acquisition, and then I was an operator, right? So I was actually doing operational security things. And the number of times that I had a contractor come in and say, I have got this widget that is awesome, and you need to buy it. It never works, because I have to translate, how does that good or service satisfy the operational need that I have, right? And that makes it too hard, particularly you've got all these different companies coming in and selling you all their stuff. What industry needs to do is look at what the RFI was or what the BAA was and understand what the government's problem actually was, and then how you're going to solution that problem. That way you're doing the company is doing the translation to help the government, as opposed to asking the government to do the translation on a product that they don't know that much about.
Got you. So don't try to sell your solution, focus on the problem. Or rather, you can try to sell your solution as long as you are focusing on the problem and you understand the problem that the government has. That's what you're saying.
Exactly. Well, yeah, and there's a translation. They need to speak in the government's terms. They need to understand what the problem is the government has and how their solution solves that problem. It's all not right. About the...
Let's blame the government back for a second. Is the government doing a good job explaining their problems?
Probably not. I would say that, like if you look at a lot of different agencies put out procurement forecasts, you can't really glean what it is that they're trying to solve, what problem they're trying to solve. And if the government does industry days, it's usually process focused as opposed to what the problem is that they're trying to solve. And so it leaves companies with trying to understand it by listening to public speeches, looking at congressional documents, looking at budget documents, and trying to put the pieces together themselves. So that's a lot of what we do at the Chertoff Group, is try to do that translation for them. So we have a lot of people who understand what the government requirements are and what the problems are they're trying to solve. And so we try to do that translation service for you.
How about let me meet with the program manager? What advice do you have for contracting officers on how to facilitate those meetings? Which most likely they don't do that. They don't tell you, let me introduce you to the program manager. Even if you tell me you have the best solution to their problem in the world, would you agree that usually, or what is the trick that the guys with the solution needs to come up with in order to convince the contracting officer to introduce the program manager?
I think there's a sequencing problem that is the issue with the premise of your question.
Okay.
So we have a program office and they have a need, right? Their job is to be going out there and doing market research and understanding what the state of the art is. The contracting officer doesn't even know that that's going on yet, because after they come up with their requirement, they then put together their purchase request. They have the statement of work or draft statement of work, goes over to finance, they commit the funds, and then it goes to the contracting officer. That's pretty late in the game. And at that point, the statement of work is pretty is 80% baked. So even if you're doing an RFI at that point, you're nibbling at the margins. The best program managers in government are constantly and consistently having interaction with industry to understand the state of the art. They're going to conferences. They're having discussions with market leaders out there, and they are encouraging that kind of feedback when it's the right time to be able to do that. So it's really not the role of the contracting officer to do that matchmaking. It's the program manager themselves in the government that are responsible for doing the market research up front.
All right. Let me see if I understand. There's a program manager with a need. He talks with the contracting officer, and then the procurement start its cycle. Now, for most, at least for small companies, they cannot be out there doing relationship building in the abstract. Small business, at least the small ones that I know, and they win anyways, they do relationship building around an opportunity. And I guess if it is a recompete, I guess you can know ahead of time. But sometimes you learn with the RFI. So what you're saying is, if you're learning something at the point of the RFI, you're a little bit late already. Is that what you're saying? For new requirements.
Absolutely. Let's say you have some new widget that does something that's completely different, and it's a new requirement for the government, right? So pick whatever it is. It's a flying wing or whatever. The way that the companies that are successful at that, they will go out and look at the total addressable market for all of the different agencies that likely have a need for that, right? So you get it early on. And then you have to build a customer map for the program managers in each of those agencies that really that have a need. And then you have to start building a rapport with those people, those program managers in each of those agencies. And that's going to conferences, that's going to industry days, that's responding to BAAs, all that sort of thing. But the problem is that's hard to do as a small business, to handle all of the different federal agencies that might have a need there. So that's the challenge with federal contracting when you try to go really wide. So if you're able, particularly as a small business, to get a foothold someplace in an agency that has the best adjacency to what it is that you sell, and then get that foothold and then expand from there into other agencies, that's probably the best approach. I see a lot of small businesses, they try to boil the ocean. They try to go to 20 different agencies, and they don't have any success at any of them, right? Because you need to figure out which ones are the most logical for the good or service that you sell, and then start building rapport. But it's going to take you 9 months to a year from the time that you try to start going to market in the federal space to really start building that rapport for a new requirement, not for a recompete. So that the government understands who you are, they have confidence in what it is that you're selling, they understand how it solves their need, and that you can be a trusted source, that you don't have foreign influence. For example, if you're selling into some sort of a security agency, all of those things.
I listen to you and I'm thinking, I think that is more for large, maybe, right? For large companies. Do you think that's more for large companies that have the budget and the time to be working on relationships?
That's why I'm saying you can be very tactical or you can be strategic.
Right.
And if you're waiting for something to come out on SAM.gov now, you're behind the power curve. If you have, and we also have to differentiate between generic services and specialized services. So like if you're just selling IT support services, that's a completely different kettle of fish than if you have some sort of piece of hardware which is proprietary to you that solves a need for a customs application, a CDP application.
What's the difference in terms of BD?
So from a BD perspective, if you are a company that specializes in Salesforce implementation, right?
Right.
Well, you can sell that to any agency. So then you can be opportunity driven. You can have partner strategies with large integrators. You can go in and try to sell yourself. Then you're trying to sell to any agency that has Salesforce, right? But if you have a new piece of X-ray, say you have backscatter technology that you can use to see through walls, right? So now there's maybe a half dozen or a dozen federal agencies that have a need for being able to see through a wall. So now you do the total addressable market. So who has a need for being able to see through the walls? What programs would be out there? How do you look at this from a budget perspective and start building that rapport? Because by the time that comes out as an opportunity on SAM.gov, the program office already knows, the 3 or 4 companies that might have this kind of capability, and you're behind the power curve trying to figure out how to sell into that agency if they don't know who you are at that point.
I love it, man. I think you solved a bit of an issue that I have had on my mind for a long time. I love it. So if it is specific, you really need to be ahead. And you can be ahead. It's doable.
Absolutely.
But if it is generic, then maybe you can be a little bit more opportunistic and start your BD at the RFI level. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing so special in the mind of that PM that probably helped to draft the RFI. It's sales for implementation. Now, if they're doing something new, very innovative, a little bit specific, a little bit different, then somebody put that in the program manager's mind, or at least the program manager might talk with a couple of companies here and there, and that's how the process starts. So if you start late, you are late. I totally get it, and I love the distinction.
That is it for this episode. Thank you for tuning in to the Best8a Podcast. Stay tuned for part 2 of this conversation with Lee Kair, where he shares his advice for CTOs and CDOs on how to transition to the private sector successfully. See you next time.